Hi, everybody. I've got general feedback on your research papers, and I'm just going to use these Legos to see if I can help you think about how the different pieces of the research project work. When you write up your research, it's really very modular writing, and I'm just going to bust it into three components right now. So I'm just going to imagine that this is an introduction. I'm going to go with this right here is your literature review, and this would be your methods section. So what I'm going to tell you first is that these three kind of modules, it's not really creative writing. It's something that's expected that we need to have these three components that are there. The introduction piece is there to help us understand what it is that you're thinking about, what it is that you're writing about. But because this is action research, because it's based on your practice in your classroom, these red pieces here, these are going to represent throughout everything I do. This is you and your classroom, your kids, your voice, the things that you and the people in your building think about. So this is always bringing it back to things that are local to you and interesting to you. And your voice is going to be strong when I hear about these things. One of the big mistakes that we often get in these types of research reports is that you back off from this personal approach. You lose the first person voice. You don't talk about yourself. You don't talk about your kids. And you kind of get out in that distant area. You start to use passive voice, all sorts of stuff. And you also are lost kind of out in that national level maybe. Where you're talking about what the research has said and what teachers in general are experiencing. You can connect to some of that, but it's got to be grounded. You and your classroom, your kids, the things that you all are thinking about all the time. Make a few connections to teachers in general. The national issue, if you picked a big educational issue, you know from reading best practices and other books that there are other teachers out there that think like you do. You can connect to them. This is also a place for you to connect to some of the key pieces from your literature review. Some of those people ended up saying some of the best things there are to say about your topic. So I'm going to put these together and just have a brief section here. I'm not going to have a ton of stuff, but do you see how your voice and your classroom are going to be front and center? And there are going to be some connections to things that may be national level, some connections to the research base and your literature review people here, but really grounded well in your thinking, your wondering, your classroom, and so on. So some of you did this one way or the other. Some of you were strong on your voice, not making a lot of connections to the national level or to the profession in general, or not making any citations. Others of you stayed almost entirely out at this big national level, and I didn't hear much about you, your classroom, and your thinking. See this little black piece right here? I'm going to come back to that later. Put it right here where you can see it. There it is. I hope I don't forget where it is, but you'll probably remember where it is. So this is your introduction. And let's put it right here. So that's a module. The next module is your literature review. And you see how these red pieces are still there all the way throughout your literature review? This is you, your classroom, your voice, the things that you wonder about in your specific situation. And then all throughout this, I've got a new color in here. This is, the research that you're reading, the literature review. But every time you dig in and look at what a piece of research has to say, you're bringing it back to your classroom, back to your students, back to your kids, back to the things that you wonder. And in many of the pieces of feedback that I've given you on specific writing projects, I've asked you to use specific sentences to bring yourself back into it every time you review something. So you might review a big chunk of literature and then you bring us back to your classroom and help us think about, what did this do for me in my thinking about this topic? What does it make me connect back to my kids and what I'm thinking about? It's not going to be this perfect symmetrical thing. You might have a nice symmetrical piece here, but then you might talk more about your classroom and then a little bit about the research and then back to your classroom and talk a little bit more about your classroom, review a bunch more of the research, make a little connection back to what it did for you in your classroom and talk some more research. But all of these pieces, do you see all of the red in here? all the red in here should be helping me figure out this is how my review of the research got me to where I have a whole bunch of things. All of these red connections back here are the literature review helping me connect back to what I think about in this topic and what I worry about for my kids. So, and I'm just going to bust this off here. By the time I get done doing my literature review and making the connections back to what the literature review taught me and made me wonder about as a teacher, then I'm going to write a conclusion. And in that conclusion, I'm really going to summarize and bring back together everything. And it's going to go right here at the end of my literature review. And I'm going to summarize pieces of the literature. I'm going to summarize some of the things that it did for me, bringing me back to my research. Maybe I want to err more on that side. Maybe I want to err more on the idea of what it did for me as a teacher, because what I'm really looking for at the end in this summary of what you learned from your research study is I just want to get this overwhelming sense that that this research led me to want to do a study. This literature review led me to want to do a study. I learned enough about what I want to know for me and my kids that I'm getting down here and I'm telling you I really want to collect some data on this. And that's my little blue piece right here, is that I'm just giving that hint that, boy, I'd really like to get some, show you what there is in my classroom that will teach us about this. So this is my literature review. I'm putting it right here next to my introduction. What do you think? Yep, methods section. Okay. In my methods section, I'm going to start out by clearly talking about the data that I'd like to be collecting, the reasons that I'd like to be collecting data on this. There's nothing wrong with me bringing back a little bit of a transition so that some of the things that I heard in that conclusion are helping me build a bridge here. So I might want to build a little bit of a bridge from this conclusion paragraph before I click it onto this methods section, just so I get the sense that, yeah, let's talk about what data collection might look like. And as I dig into the data collection, I'm going to talk about my participants and my context and my data collection techniques. I might talk about bias and all of the things that you expect in a literature review. Those are all going to be here, but I'm also going to be constantly thinking back to me in my classroom, some of the things that I learned from my literature review. This context here is connected to my literature review and to my classroom. And I'm talking constantly as I put these things together. I might tell you one piece of my methods, and then I'm going to tell you how it all connects back to what I want to know, what I want to learn about the kids, and why this little thing that I decided to do it in my classroom, at my school. That's a good way to answer this research question because, and that's how this first piece is going to work. The next piece is going to have that same parallel structure where I might lay out part of my methodology, but then I'm going to bring it back here and I'm going to tell you why that's a good fit. I might pick a specific technique like an interview, and I'm going to tell you, an interview is a good way to figure out these things that I learned about in my literature review, and I'm going to write some of my interview questions based on things that I learned in that literature review, and that matches me in my classroom because of X, Y, and Z. So do you see how each of these pieces, every decision that I've made in my methods section, I'm bringing it back to it being a good fit for what I wanted to learn, which is what I kind of laid out here and here. And then at the end of my methods section, I'm going to have a conclusion again. And in that conclusion, I'm going to bring together my plan for how I'm going to learn about my question. And I'm going to put that together with some little bit of reference back to the literature review. Some summary of what the actual methods are, and some clear connections back to me and the purposes that I have in all of this. So that's going to go at the end of the methods section. So when I put all of these things together, what I'm going to find is that if I've done the summary, the conclusion paragraph really well here and really well here, I'm probably going to have a new research question, because my research question will now be really well informed by this summary and this summary, where I've really made a clear connection between what I think and what data I'm going to be collecting. Those come together fairly well. And so once all of those things are together and I really know what this conclusion and this conclusion look like, I'm going to be able to write a research question that has the data front and center in it. And I'm going to be able to go back to my introduction and say, what I'd really like to do in my research question is I would like to learn through observational techniques what writing motivation is going to look like in my classroom when I switch programs. I think that's one of your actual topics. So that is much more specific than saying I want to learn about writing motivation. Writing motivation is the topic, but you want to get it right down to this question sounding like it implies the data that you're actually going to be collecting. Oh, you noticed it, but I didn't. There we go. We certainly don't put the methods section before the literature review, do we? I'm going to put it all together now. My introduction, fairly short and brief, but now I've found out probably what my real research question is. You've had an idea of what that research question is all along, but you probably didn't know it until you actually started collecting some of your data and seeing what the actual data is going to look like. You might not have known what this research question was until you actually put yourself back into the literature review and figured out how it related to you and your classroom. And as far as length goes, I'm seeing about the right kinds of things. I would expect this to be about 20 pages long in a capstone or a master's thesis. And so it's not a problem if it goes a little bit longer than that. But think about this sort of modular approach. And remember that your research question may still be emerging. You may still need some revising to be able to get there. And then we can change this.